Well, I ain't got no home, I'm just a rambling round. I'm just a wandering worker, I go from town to town. Police make it hard wherever I may go, and I ain't got no home in this world anymore. My brothers and my sisters, they're stranded on this road. It's a hot and dusty road where 1,000,000 feet I've trod. Banker took my home, Lord, he kicked me from my door. And I ain't got no home in this world anymore. I ain't got no home, I'm just rambling round. I'm just a wandering worker, I go from town to town. Police make it hard wherever I may go, and I ain't got no home in this world anymore. Hi, this is Rik Palieri, and welcome to a very special chapter in the Songwriter's Notebook. Now, I know a lot of you folks have heard that song many times before, and you all know about Woody Guthrie. But today, we're going to learn about things that you don't often hear about Woody Guthrie, because I'm really honored to have Nora Guthrie as my guest in the Songwriter's Notebook. Hi, Nora.
Hi, Rik. Can't wait. Ooh, what's she going to say?
Well, I think that a lot of people, they're always saying, like, what would Woody do, and what would Woody think, and what would Woody say? And I think that, a lot of us, we guess a lot, but we really don't know Woody as what he was really like. And I thought it would be very interesting for you to share some of those stories that aren't heard as often. And, while most of us were, thinking of that you were sitting there as a child and you're hearing that, put your finger in the air, in the air. Put your finger in the air, in the air. Put your finger in the air and leave it right there. Put your finger in the air, in the air. But that wasn't what it was all about. Actually, there was music in your house, but it was different than people really think about.
Well, I have to laugh when you play the children's songs, because here, the inside story is that they were created to manipulate us to do things like clean the house, wash your face, go to sleep, wake up. I mean, most of my father's songs are like a to-do list of what to do during the day. And my mother was a dancer, and they realized together, they were, just so mischievous. They realized together that the way to get children to do anything is to make a game out of it, and with a song attached, it's even better. Mm-hmm. So all of these songs, like I dropped my shoe, pick it up, I dropped my shoe, and we would go around the house, say, let's play the pick up the things game, and we'd all sing along together. So it was great for parents out there. I'm telling you, it works like magic. We had from wake up to cleano, to take a bath, to go to school, to every aspect of the day, to go to sleep, and sleep eye was choreographed.
Was your mom kind of promoting that a little bit?
Oh, absolutely. Not only that, but they created play parties as a team, my mother and my father. And other parents would come and like, how'd you get the kids to do that? Can you do that over here? So they would have play parties, and they would go out and make like $5 or whatever it was. And they would do the same routines with all the neighborhood children for their parents. But it's really a great way to control the situation.
Even today.
Yes, absolutely.
Even today.
Yes.
Kids still love those songs, and it's one of those things that brings a family together.
Yeah. Well, it's just a much better way of saying, clean up your room. It's just like it works like magic. So when you play that song, I mean, since you started this program saying we're going to hear things we never heard before, I'm telling you the motivation behind writing these songs.
I'm really glad to hear that. And I was kind of going in a little different direction, because what I remember reading is the fact that you actually listened to a lot of music from your grandma, in Yiddish. And songs and poetry.
Well, our household was music all the time, pretty much, different kinds of music. On my mother's side, my grandmother was a Yiddish composer, poet, and lyricist. So there was a bit more than blintzes around the house. That was part of the environment. But my father and his friends were really the dominant thing. So, in those days, everybody would just drop by. And our house was just like, the joke is Ramblin' Jack Elliott came and dropped by and stayed for a year and a half. It was that kind of scene. So it was very casual, and people would come by and they would spend hours there. Many times in the early days when we were very little, my mother was on tour with the Martha Graham Company. So she was the breadwinner to a great extent. And while she was out, my father and people like Jack Elliott or Cisco Houston, Sonny Terry Brown and McGee, they would gather at the apartment where we lived and play music all day long. And I remember once asking Jack Elliott, because we're a year apart. I have two brothers, Arlo, which a lot of people know, and I have another brother, Jody, who was named after Tom Joad, actually, and myself, and we're just a year apart. So there's like a 1-year-old, a 2-year-old, and a 3-year-old. 36 diapers a day, 25 bottles in those days of juice. And I remember once asking Jack, like, how did you guys handle 3 toddlers at one time? And he says, well, we put a little rum in the orange juice in your bottle. Just calmed you right down. Of course, that would be, you get arrested for that today. But in those days, that was actually a lot of families did that. You had a lot of ethnic families, Italian and stuff, put a little wine with water for a baby. It wasn't so terrible. Whiskey, for teething, things like that.
I remember
so
that.
they put a little rum in the orange juice. And
so, I think that it must have been, now at the time, you didn't realize that these people were going to be really well known. I mean, they were sort of well known in certain circles, but you had no idea that they were going to be more or less like folk legends. Yeah. Like Cisco Houston, and Ramblin' Jack, and I don't know.
And Pete.
And Pete.
I mean, who?
Oh, yeah. And how often did Pete stop by?
Well, Pete was on the road a lot himself, whereas Jack and Cisco and those guys tended to be more around town. There was like a town crowd, and Pete was already, all over the world doing all kinds of things. So it was a different crowd, but again, it was just, I keep thinking of like Jackie Gleason and his bowling ball club, like. In the 50s, dads did stuff like that. I guess moms had clubs too, sewing clubs, and then there were the bowling clubs or the, different kinds of things. And my dad's club was guitar players. So they were always around. They were always playing, and it was just like his group,
It sounds pretty interesting. Now, I don't think, was Leadbelly still alive during that? Did you get a chance to remember him?
Leadbelly passed away a month before I was born.
That's what I was thinking. It was really
He passed away in December of 49, and I was born in January of 50.
But you felt that influence of Leadbelly in those kind of music parties that they would have. They would be singing a lot of Leadbelly songs, or?
Yeah, well, Leadbelly was also a big fan of children and children's music. So he was the one, Pick a Bale of Cotton. There were a lot of what they called play party songs. And during the 40s, they had a radio show actually together. And they would sing, they would have these let's sing all the play party songs we know. And it would be Woody and Leadbelly and Josh White, Alan Lomax, again, the guys, and some of the girls also, getting together and doing all the play party songs.
Now, there was a story that I heard that was really a really charming story from Fred Hellerman, because I was talking with Fred, and I was asking him about Leadbelly. Did he get a chance to sing some of the Weaver songs? He said, no, they really didn't get a chance. But he said he used to they used to have those Monday night blues parties at Leadbelly's house. And he said that he can remember one time that he went there, and Leadbelly was there, and he had his guitar, but he wouldn't pick it up. He was sitting there, he's holding the guitar, and he was waiting. He was just kind of waiting. And, the party was going on, and then finally, when Leadbelly picked up his guitar, he said you could hear all the doors in the apartment house open up, and all of these kids with blankets came up and sat around Leadbelly when he was singing.
Was this in New York?
It was in New York.
Because he had an apartment, for any of your viewers who know New York City, had an apartment right off Tompkins Square Park on 10th Street. And it's really, the apartment's still there, and I've walked many musicians past it just to highlight there should be a plaque that Leadbelly lived there. And I've talked to some of the kids in the street, like, who used to live here? But it was, a lot of people, they were very inviting, Leadbelly and his family, and neighbors and everybody, again, would come up to his apartment and play for hours. I mean, my mother used to describe, in our apartment, she'd leave and go, Cisco would be there, somebody would be there, she'd go for the day and come back. She said not only they were still playing, but they were still playing the same song.
It might have been that whiskey that was in the glass.
My mother said they called it practicing.
Well, I think that's the kind of image that most of us want to have. That's what we think about. And unfortunately, there was a whole nother side that you were dealing with your dad. And that was the Huntington's chorea.
Right.
And this was something that at the time that nobody really knew what was going on. And you probably remember those days of when he was struggling with that. And what was that like for you?
We get into the sad part of the story so early.
Well,
it was like,
I know.
Yeah. Listen, it was, my father developed Huntington's. He started showing signs in the late 40s. It's a disease he inherited from his mother, and no one knew when she had it that it was hereditary. So there were different kinds of information going around, like only women could inherit it, or maybe this or maybe that, because there was no research done on it at the time. Anyway, long story short, he got it, and some of the symptoms of it are slurred speech and walking. Basically, you look like you're drunk and you sound like you're drunk. And my dad also did drink, so put it all together, and it took a long time for them to figure out what was wrong. And it got worse and worse and worse. And eventually, he was hospitalized in the mid-1950s permanently. And so most of my life growing up with him was taking care of a sick father. And I say that it's not such an unusual experience, because there's probably a lot of people out there that grew up with sick, someone in the family that needed constant care, and our family was just like that. So he was in the hospital. He was deemed incurable, and the symptoms get worse and worse and worse. And at the time, again, because nothing was known about it, not only was it a slow-moving, fatal disease, it happened to be very ugly at the same time, because the symptoms are loss of control of limbs, like I say, slurred speech, limping, falling, losing control of your bladder, of everything. So he was in a ward with 50 other patients. It was a psychiatric ward. And it was nasty. I don't know how else to say it. It was a nasty, dirty kind of thing.
Now
and it was very hard to live with that.
This book here, Warty 40, is a book that talks about that part of his life. And on the front of it, there's this tree. And this is the Magic-y tree?
Yeah, so we used to visit my father once a week in the hospital. We would either bring him home for hootenannies on the weekends, if he felt good enough, or we would go to the hospital and visit him there. And in order not to frighten the children, my parents being very creative, as we talked about, created a whole magic tree story. And we would go under the magic tree, we would climb and sing, and he would sit under the tree with my mother, and they would talk about how we're doing in school and what's going on, etc. And they tried to make it as pleasant an experience as possible. And that's what they did. And the Magic-y Tree, by the way, they did tear down the hospital a couple of years ago, but the Magic-y Tree was kept up.
It's still there.
It's still standing, yeah.
Yeah. Well, this is a really important book, and there's a little book that goes with it that really talks about this time. And there's been a lot of things that we're going to try to squeeze in here, and that's why I'm moving kind of fast.
Okay.
But at that particular point, your brother was also playing music. And I remember you saying that one day this young fellow showed up at your house with a guitar, and you opened the door. And you closed it again. Now, who was that guy's name?
One of many young guys. Like I said, on Sundays, musicians would come out to our house for these hootenannies, and also some of them would like to visit my father at the hospital. And I'll mention actually John Cohen from the New Lost City Ramblers. I remember him vividly sitting on the living room floor playing music, and he had a very tender association with my father, very helpful. Very tender. And so a number of young guys came, and to be honest, for me, there was just a lot of them. You didn't really pay attention to all of them. You know, we used to actually go upstairs when everybody came, and we would play the Everly Brothers songs. And we knew Bye Bye Love, we knew all the harmonies, and you know, the whole thing from the early rock and roll 50s songs. But there was one day when a young guy came after school, I remember, because I was watching American Bandstand, which was an early rock and roll television show. And they would show you how to do these different dances, like the twist and the fish. It was before the fish, so it was like the Lindy and the stroll and the Watusi and the locomotion. So I was totally engaged in learning, I think it was the locomotion. There was a knock at the door. My mother wasn't home, she was working, and I answered the door, and there was a kind of scruffy looking guy, and he said something about, I'm here to see Woody Guthrie, and I needed to get back to the television because I needed to know how to do the locomotion. So I kind of said, he's not here, and I closed the door, ran back to the television, caught the last bit of the locomotion, knock at the door again, and it's like, you go back to the door. I was told Woody Guthrie lived here, and I wanted to go see him. I'm like, I said, he's not here. You know? And we were home alone, so of course we were told not to let anybody in. Right. Closed the door again, ran back to the American Bandstand. Arlo came down the stairs to hear what the commotion was about. I'm 11 years old, by the way, at the time. Arlo's 13. So he's just at that, a little bit older, tipping. He's knock at the door again. He opens the door, and he sees the guy has a guitar or something. They start talking, and he says it's okay for the guy to come in. They call my mother and say, is it okay? There's a guy here. She goes, yeah, I'll be home in a little while. I think the two of them played music for a little while, and my mom came home and said, so who are you? And he said, I'm Bob Dylan. But the joke is that if it was up to me, folk music history would have been very different because I did not let him in the house.
But
he's forgiven me.
But in 1967, you had your own kind of moment where you had a boyfriend, and his name was Eric Eisner.
Yeah.
And you were kind of collaborating on a very unusual project. Can you talk about that?
Well, just again, coming out of this folk music planet, that I was born into, I'm the youngest, so I had endured folk music my whole life from the day I was born, and everyone above me played guitars. So I had right above me, I had two brothers. They played mandolin, guitar, fiddle, banjo, everything. And then there was Jack Elliott, who was kind of a surrogate older brother. There was Cisco, and blah, blah. There's like a whole chain of guitar playing people who tuned a lot, which drove me crazy. Tuning, it's just a horrible thing. It's just,
You're talking to a banjo player.
I have nightmares of people sitting in a circle in my house tuning, and they don't talk, they just look at each other like, they kind of look around, and it's like, ah! So I just had to become a dancer. No, but before that, I had a boyfriend, and we got into jazz and bossa nova. This was in '64. I actually heard João Gilberto and people like that. And my boyfriend was actually a really good songwriter. And at the time, it was the early '60s. John Sebastian was starting the Love and Spoonful that year. And this guy used to write songs, but he couldn't sing. So he would ask me to sing his songs when he was kind of peddling them. I was 17 at the time. And John heard me, and he said, you should sing. You got a nice voice. So Sebastian talked me into this, making a record or two with Eric. And then at the same time, Janice Ian came out with Society's Child. And I went, she's a lot better than I am. Well, she's like short with curly hair. I went, she's better. Give it to her.
Well, the interesting thing is that if you look up the song that you recorded, Emily's Illness, there is pages and pages written about this song. You could be the grandma
of psychedelic.
Of goth. The grandma of goth. You could be that. Really, they go into every word that you said. And the thing that I was wondering is...
It was very unusual. If any of your people listening to this, look up this song, it's very strange and very unusual and very psychedelic. It's like pre-White Rabbit.
Oh yeah,
it's like
and all the the different strings on there. It's a very produced piece of music.
Well, who did this sound? It was Artie Schreck, who did "You're a Big Boy Now." Do you remember that? You're a big boy now. They used that for the theme song for the TV show. He was very, very hot producer at the time, and he did the record with us.
Yeah. Well,
I used to open for George Carlin. Put that in your bottle and drink it. When I first started out, my manager was George Carlin's manager, so he used to have me open for George Carlin.
Well, we're gonna move along. For you folks who are watching, I hope that you'll dial up the Emily's Illness, and it's almost like reading about Sgt. Pepper's. Really, it took me like 15 minutes to read this thing, so it's worth it for you folks to read it. Now, the thing is that you were a dancer, and then your mom was trying to make sure that Woody's legacy continued, and you got involved with that. And we have to talk a little bit about that, about the Woody Guthrie Foundation and all the different projects that you got involved in.
Well, listen, what really happened was people's lives go in strange directions, and there's a sense of fate or destiny or necessity. And my personal feeling about my own life has been, if anyone asked me, who am I? I'm a kind of void filler. That's who I am. I'm a jack of all trades, master of none. But when there's something that needs to be done, I feel like I'm saying this very sincerely, I feel like I can go in there and help out. And that's exactly what was happening in the office of Harold Leventhal at that time. And Harold was Pete Seeger's manager, Judy Collins. He had a whole group of musicians. And again, I was not involved in the folk scene at all. I'm a modern dancer from New York, working, doing, weird undergroundy kind of things. And anyway, he called me in the office and he said he was going to retire and what was going to happen with my father's stuff. And I went, I don't know. I'll try to help. I'll see what I can do. Long story short, when I started looking through my father's material, it wasn't the Dust Bowl ballads that I discovered first. It wasn't all the Reuben James and the songs that in the folk catalog that most people know. It was like really weird stuff, very unusual lyrics. Long story short, when I counted them, there were over 3,000 lyrics. And I even asked Pete Seeger, and I used to come with a tape or something and say, Pete, have you ever heard this lyric before? And he'd go, no. And Pete Seeger doesn't know a Woody Guthrie song, then that's weird. I would ask my brother, if he ever heard it. So I started working with artists, setting new music to some of these lyrics that I was just discovering.
So I think what we can do is we can stop right there, because we might actually do another program to get all of this information in. So I think we only have a few minutes on this part of the Songwriter's Notebook, and so I hope you will join us again for part 2, where we'll talk a little bit more in depth about all the different projects that you've been doing in order to bring Woody to a new generation, because I think that's really important. And I think what we can do is we can grab a guitar here.
You can do so long.
All right. Well, if you have to sing it. How much time do we have? Nobody has 1 minute. So long, it's been good to know you. So long, it's been good to know you. So long, it's been good to know you. This dusty old dust is getting my home, and I gotta be drifting along. Let's sing it one more time. So long, it's been good to know you. So long, it's been good to know you. So long, it's been good to know you. This dusty old dust is getting my home, and I gotta be drifting along. So this is Rik Palieri from the Songwriter's Notebook, hoping that you'll stay tuned for part 2 of this interview.